Good afternoon on today's Angry Alien Bulletin.
O'Hare Tower, this is Dave.
Hey, Dave, it's Sid from United Tower.
Hey, Sid.
Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17?
Don't even start, Sue.
No,
You're seeing flying discs.
well, that's what the pilot and the ramp guys are telling us. The C-17, they saw some flying disc above, and we can't see
Come
above us.
on,
You
Sue.
didn't see it, right?
Hey, you guys been celebrating the holidays already over there or what? You having a Christmas party today? I have not seen anything, Sue. And if I did, I wouldn't admit to it. No, I have not seen any flying discs at Gate C-17. Unless you got a new aircraft you're bringing out today that we don't know about.
And thus began one of the most compelling mass UFO sightings in the 21st century. But interestingly enough, a team of physicists got together recently and not only determined a new way that UFOs might be able to travel between the stars at faster than light velocities, but also how a drive with these kinds of capabilities would directly correspond to what was observed on that very strange day in 2006. All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. So, you may have noticed on this channel that I very seldom talk about warp drive, even though warp drive is the subject of quite a lot of science-related channels, simply because, well, in the last 30 years or so, the idea of how warp drive might theoretically exist has emerged in popular scientific journals, something called an Alcubierre warp drive, and the idea behind it is something that should be pretty familiar to any science fiction enthusiast. The idea that if you want to travel significantly faster than light, you don't need to actually travel that fast. Instead, what you do is reduce the space between you and your destination. Fold space, so to speak, to where you don't have to traverse as much distance to get from A to B. And the more you can shrink the distance involved, the faster you are, at least theoretically, traveling or apparently traveling. And you can do all that without actually having to travel faster than light. The problem, of course, with the Alcubierre warp drive and just about any other warp drive that's come after it is that in order to make it work, you need to have a wide variety of things that only exist in theory. Things like strange matter, things that we talk about only on the fringes of physics, things that don't violate any of Einstein's theories. But does just not violating Einstein's theories, is that the only prerequisite to these things existing? And also colossal amounts of energy being involved. The original Alcubierre warp drive would require that you convert a planet substantially larger than Jupiter directly to energy to create it. Of course, that much energy would probably be enough to annihilate about a tenth of the Milky Way galaxy. I mean, we are talking about levels of technology that arguably could never be achieved by any alien civilization, no matter how advanced. However, there have been advances made and new theories that have been put forward that require less energy, less strange matter, less negative energy, that sort of thing. Nevertheless, it still requires a certain portion of things that may or may not exist, in spite of all of our work with particle accelerators and such, creating things like antimatter. A lot of these things we have never created, nor do we have any even theoretical procedures or ideas as to how we might bring these things into being. So really, the idea of a warp drive remains very much on the fringes of known science, and I can understand why. I mean, it seems to me that if you had the ability to travel significantly faster than the speed of light, if that was even theoretically possible, then we should be up to our armpits in aliens right now. There should at least be several dozen species throughout the galaxy who have mastered this process, and why have they not all come to pay us a visit at some point in recorded history? If you can go a lot faster than the speed of light, it would make visiting this very, very promising planet a pretty easy thing to do for just about any civilization. Not only that, at least in theory, somebody who had mastered the capabilities of Alcubierre warp drives could also, again, at least in theory, travel in time. So, do we have time travelers roaming about the universe at will? All of these things seem to be a little extreme to me. They seem, in my opinion, to sort of push a little bit against the boundaries of what I think is reasonable. But at the same time, I try to be open-minded enough to admit that perhaps something like this could exist. And then recently, a team of physicists, we're talking just a few days ago, came out with a report, a new paper, suggesting that another type of warp drive, a less ambitious warp drive, could exist, could be created without the use of any of these strange things, without the use of negative energy, strange matter. You don't need any of those things to make this type of warp drive work. And also, interestingly enough, a team of physicists also toyed with the idea of whether or not we may have actually seen a warp drive in operation in recent history. And they took a very famous mass sighting, UFO mass sighting at Chicago O'Hare Airport in 2006 and used that as a case study. They took the behavior of the craft that was observed by quite a number of witnesses. It was photographed too, by the way. Unfortunately, the cell phone cameras of 2006 were pretty awful, so the photos aren't all that convincing, but still, the testimony definitely is. In any event, they took the behavior of that object and all the things that it allegedly did and put that side by side with the theoretical capabilities of a ship that was making use of a warp drive. Interestingly enough, turned out to be an exact fit.
I got Dwight.
Dwight,
Yes.
what happened to Dave? Did he have to take a break because I called him?
No.
This is Super United.
Yes.
There was a disc out there flying around.
There was a what?
A disc?
A disc? Can you hang on 1 second?
Sure, Dwight.
Okay, I'm sorry. What can I do for you now?
Alright, I told Dave there was a disc flying outside above Charlie 17, and he thought I was pretty much high. But, I'm not high and I'm not drinking.
Yeah.
Someone actually has a picture of it, so if you guys see it out there,
A disc? Like a frisbee?
like a UFO type thing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
They have a picture of it.
How high above Charlie 17?
Well, it was above our tower. So, if you happen to see him,
You know what? I'll keep a peeled eye for that.
alright.
Okay.
Big much.
Shortly after 4:15 p.m. Central Standard Time on November 7th of 2006 might have seemed like any other ordinary overcast winter afternoon for United Airlines employees outside of Gate C-17 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Ordinary, except for what looked like a hole in the sky above one of the country's busiest hubs for international air travel. Visible in the 1,900-foot cloud base was an almost perfect hole, the apparent footprint left by a round, unidentified object that had been seen hovering there just moments earlier before it rapidly ascended, punching through the clouds on its departure. What unfolded over Chicago that afternoon would become one of the most talked about UAP incidents of the new millennium. Today, what is remembered as the 2006 O'Hare International Airport UAP incident also remains a stark reminder of the potential hazards that aviators face amidst reports involving unrecognized objects that seemingly invade America's most sensitive airspace with utter disregard for federal aviation ordinances. Now, the FAA said that nothing had been detected on radar that afternoon, but still, several employees and even perhaps a few of the pilots and crew aboard outgoing flights, although frankly a lot of them have been very hesitant to give their testimony for For obvious reasons, never a good idea to talk about UFOs if you're in the airline business. Well, it is a very large number of witnesses, all of whom seem to have observed the same thing, and their testimony is backed up by several photos which, although admittedly quite fuzzy, are still typical of the cell phones of that time and seem to back up those claims. It doesn't seem like a fraudulent claim at all. Doesn't seem like an elaborate hoax put together by all of these witnesses. This seems like the real thing. And interestingly enough, a team of physicists who have been researching warp drive had a look at this case in 2023 in conjunction with their latest work on warp drive and determined that the UFO in question might have been exhibiting behavior that would be typical for a spacecraft using this type of propulsion system. Now, first of all, let's talk about the incident itself, as reported by the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. And this, by the way, is entitled Report of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon and Its Safety Implications at O'Hare International Airport on November 7th of 2006. Quote, a number of highly reliable airline employees and others reported seeing a round, revolving, gray, metallic-appearing object, hereafter called an unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UAP, hovering approximately above United Airlines Gate C-17 in Concourse C at an altitude of less than 1,900 feet above ground level and departing sometime between 4:18 and 4:33 p.m. Since two United taxi mechanics reported seeing the object sometime after 4 p.m., the object could have been present for at least 18 minutes or more. The following subjects are discussed here: description of eyewitness accounts, visibility from the control tower, weather conditions, and the reported hole in the cloud allegedly caused by the UAP. So the earliest known witness was assisting the pushback of a B-737 from Gate C-17. He was standing on the tarmac beside the nose of the jet with his communication headset cable plugged into the connection port in the nose of the airplane. And there is apparently a photograph that was taken by this individual shortly after he spotted the object. And he said, quote, he was compelled to look straight up for some reason and was startled to see the craft hovering silently. He then made a radio call over his headset to the airline's operations center in Sylvia, United Airlines Zone 5 control coordinator who is responsible for 10 gates. He then told the cockpit crew in the airplane beside him about what he was looking at. One or both of the crew allegedly opened their side windows and looked up at the UAP. However, this cannot be confirmed. Later, witness A said he thought that the object was between 500 and 1,000 feet altitude directly above his gate. He was sure that the UAP was round and rotating pretty fast. He said that the object shot off into the clouds about 2 minutes after the initial sighting and that it was about the same angular size as a quarter held at arm's length, or just over 2 degrees arc in diameter. He estimated that between 10 and 15 people had seen the object. Now, both ground crew continued with their job of taxiing the aircraft, and just before reaching gate A14 or A13, both witnesses leaned forward and looked diagonally to the right in the direction of gate C-17. Witness B estimated that the object was still there, hovering about 100 to 200 feet beneath the clouds. The UAP was seen in the upper right corner of the left front cockpit windshield. It was stationary and did not appear to be revolving at that point. To him, it appeared hazy on its bottom and both ends, but clearer on top. Even if they had not been alerted to its presence by radio contact, it was clearly conspicuous to the naked eye. It never changed brightness, color, or shape at any time during the 30 to 60 second long viewing period. It didn't flash or give off any lights, and it was definitely not a blimp. It appeared as an oval with a width to height ratio of approximately 2.7 to 10. He also said, "I'll tell you definitely, it's not an airplane as we know it." And the witnesses continue to pile up. According to a report submitted to the National UFO Reporting Center, witness D was working in his office when he heard the Operations Center announcement about the UAP over the company's radio frequency at about 4:30 p.m. He immediately left his office and walked to the gate B5 area, where he looked up and saw the UAP located at about a 45-degree angle. And he was quoted as saying, "I stood outside in the gate area not knowing what to think, just trying to figure out what it was. I knew no one would make a false call like that. But if someone was bouncing a weather balloon or something else over O'Hare, we had to stop it because it was in very close proximity to our flight operations." He also said, "I'm absolutely convinced that the object wasn't much bigger than 6 to 10 feet in diameter. It took me a second to find the UFO, and I only noticed it because I knew where to look." He described the UAP as an elliptical, sphere-like dark metal object. From his location, he said that the object rose almost instantaneously at a slight angle towards the east. Its departure was so fast he thought he could see a kind of blurred effect in his vision. And then there was another employee, this is witness E, so 5 witnesses thus far, who were standing with him at the time. Later, he admitted that if it ever happened again, he would probably report it. And then there was the first officer of the B-737 that was still parked at gate C-17. Actually, the pilot also saw the object but refused to be interviewed. The first officer, however, said that they opened their cockpit side windows and looked up at the object. First officer, age 39 with over 13,000 flight hours, said that the UAP was a dirty aluminum color, very stable and without any optical distortions near it. It was perfectly round and silent. He said that neither he nor the captain took a photo of the object, and then a company supervisor arrived and ordered them to push back for a scheduled departure time. Unfortunately, as I said before, the captain didn't want to be interviewed. So a huge number of witnesses here and lots of different descriptions, which may be slight variations in terms of size and that sort of thing, but overall very consistent, and no real reason as to why all these people would have known each other and would have collaborated on any sort of hoax here. Very, very compelling case, to say the least. So what has led a team of physicists who are studying warp drive come to the conclusion that there was something about this incident that leads them to believe that it might have been a spacecraft making use of a warp drive? Well, first of all, let's talk about the warp drive itself. A warp drive utilizes a circular torus, at least in theory, that has an oscillating amount of strange matter or negative matter combined with negative energy. Again, all highly theoretical stuff here. And that oscillating torus warps the space-time continuum around the spacecraft. It essentially removes it from the space-time continuum and makes it sort of into its own little pocket universe. In some ways, some people argue that a warp drive is also interdimensional travel. Once you have a pocket universe, so to speak, where you can manipulate it at will, you can make the distance from A to B a lot smaller. So even if the pocket universe is only a few hundred meters in diameter, for example, that makes the distance that you have to travel from one side of that bubble or universe, whatever you want to call it, to the other substantially smaller if you shrink it. So, for example, for every 100 meters that the spacecraft is traveling within the bubble, it's actually covering maybe a few kilometers in the outside universe, allowing it to travel very, very quickly, or at least apparently so. So the shape of the craft as described by eyewitnesses corresponds, at least according to the physicists, to what this sort of spacecraft would actually look like. It's the ideal shape for many known warp drive designs. Some models of warp drive space-time suggest that the shape of the spacecraft and the resulting geometry of space-time bending could significantly reduce energy requirements, and depending on the specific design of the warp drive, the passenger holding craft may benefit from a saucer or spherical shape per the laws of general relativity, according again to this team of physicists. In addition to that, you have observation 2, the movement of the UAP. From the eyewitness testimony, it seems reasonable to claim that a metallic object around 50 feet in diameter was hovering about 1,500 feet above a passenger gate at an international airport within regulated airspace, says Brandon Melcher, PhD, one of the physicists behind the team's analysis. After some time, the object accelerated from 0 to about 1,000 to 2,000 feet per second almost instantaneously. Although some modern drones are capable of sudden fast vertical acceleration from a hovering position, most unmanned aerial vehicles currently in use do not bear a saucer-shaped appearance of the craft in question, and none of them have been able to accelerate at the speed that many of the witnesses at the Chicago O'Hare UAP incident described. So that sudden acceleration suggests the possible existence of a warp bubble that would allow a spacecraft to move and accelerate far faster than an outside observer would think possible. Now also you have the lack of a radar signature. It is interesting to note the absence of any radar evidence of an object in this case. The Alcubierre warp drive also causes light rays approaching from behind to bounce off the bubble, but away from their initial trajectory. The radar cross-section, therefore, would be incredibly small. One fascinating effect of warp bubbles is how they also explain the lack of a radar signal. Light rays propagating from behind seem to diverge away from the bubble's center, masking its detection. This would explain why there was no radar ping to the object allegedly hovering over a passenger gate at O'Hare Airport. If the light gets deflected away from the object, there will be no radar pings. And then also you have the hole in the clouds. This one is extremely interesting. Quote, "In our study of proposed warp drive solutions, we have found that the Alcubierre warp drive appears to induce behaviors that match the observed phenomena." Once again, this is according to Melcher and his testimony to the debrief that I have been quoting extensively from in the course of this video. This warp drive acts as a focusing lens for material caught up in front of the craft. As the bubble passes through a given medium, the particles in front of it move along with the craft for some time, creating a hole due to the time mismatch between the at-rest particles traversing the width of the bubble and the time it takes the bubble to move into the cloud. According to the team's interpretation of warp theory, a craft that raced through a cloud bank like the one present at the time of the 2006 incident would likely produce a hole nearly identical to the one the witnesses described seeing at the time. However, we need to get real here because this team also notes that there are some very natural phenomena that can produce the same sorts of circular openings in cloud layers. Quote, "There is a phenomenon called fall streak holes or hole punch clouds. Sometimes clouds in the sky become supercooled. The temperature of the water vapor in the clouds is below freezing at this point, but no seed forms to induce freezing. When a plane or other object flies through such a cloud, it is possible that the pressure differential behind the wings or fins can create or drop a seed of ice. The resulting rapid freezing of the cloud appears as a hole with a central bit of snowfall, and the frozen cloud falls as snow for a little bit. Typical flight paths, however, do not take ascending or descending planes directly over airport terminals. So even if this kind of hole in the clouds can be created by some other vehicle or some other object passing quickly through the clouds, that doesn't mean that it was a conventional aircraft. Quote, if a plane did indeed create the fall streak hole, it would represent one of the most severe violations of U.S. airspace ever recorded, as it put thousands of civilian lives at risk. I think it's also worth mentioning that there are other types of propulsion, such as magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion that I talked about in a previous video, that theoretically could explain a lot of these characteristics as well. The sudden acceleration without any visible means of propulsion, the saucer shape of the vehicle, and as we have seen, the fall streak hole could have been created by a UFO regardless of what sort of propulsion system it was using, if it passed through the clouds quickly enough and at the right time. So what's the conclusion here? Well, in 2006, something very strange did indeed happen over the Chicago O'Hare Airport. There are just too many witnesses, and also the photographs that were taken by these witnesses lead me to believe that something unusual did happen. Did it have something to do with a warp drive? Well, that has yet to be seen. Also, one thing to keep in mind, the most recent discoveries made when it comes to warp drives indicate that they are much easier to create if you're not using them to go faster than light. As a matter of fact, they may not require strange matter, negative matter, or anything like that at all if you are traveling at subluminal speeds. If that is indeed the case, not only is this a propulsion method that could bring other species into contact with us, it's something that we might be able to build sometime in the conceivable future. I'd like to thank new Patreon member Alra Comet, and I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that first name, also Mark Crossman, Alan Scott, Gable, and Sneaky Squid. In addition to that, Dave R. edited his membership up. Thank you so much. Paul Reed also increased his membership. All of this combining to bring us well past 60% of our subscriber base as Patreon supporters. And keep in mind that I have new exclusive content for Patreon supporters now posted, so if you want to take advantage of that, all the details are in the description. I would like to thank the Flight Sim Deck for this amazing footage, and also for Astronaut for their ongoing contributions to this channel. Their animations are so good. Please support both these channels. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space.